Welcome back to these series of lectures. I'm going to continue here with the Great War. We want to talk about the settlement, probably the most important aspect of this series of catastrophic events. This, of course, is the Versailles Treaty, named for the Versailles Palace just outside of Paris, where the victors of the Great War gather and sort of rewrite the boundaries of Europe and the Middle East. So let's just go through some of these things that occur here. Let's start with Germany. Number one, in the treaty itself, there's a preamble. It's called the War Guilt Clause. This is important. The Allies decide to explicitly blame Germany for the war. And Germany deserves a fair share of the burden here, but I think after looking at these long-term causes and the sequence of events that lead to the war, you can see that there are other nations that hold some responsibility for this as well. So this war guilt clause does not set well with the German people. Germany is going to be, its territory is going to be rearranged, shall we say. A small piece of Germany contiguous to Denmark is going to be taken. More importantly, on the western front, the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine are going to revert to French sovereignty. The Rhineland, that portion of Germany contiguous to the Rhine River, which runs north through western Germany before turning and going into the English Channel or the North Sea. That Rhineland is going to be demilitarized. The French insist upon this. The French declare they won't sign the treaty unless this area of Germany is demilitarized. What the French are trying to do is push Germany back to the east. So if Germany ever decides to invade France again, they're going to have to do it from a few hundred miles further east, this obviously giving the French an advantage, or at least an attempt to defend themselves should the Germans invade again. So the Rhineland is demilitarized. Alsace and Lorraine go back to France. In the east, there's a whole portion of eastern Germany and part of Prussia that's now going to be sliced away from Germany and is going to help create the new state of Poland. Poland had disappeared through a number of partitions in the late 18th century. Now Poland's going to be revived. Now keep this in mind, and this is important. That portion of Germany that is now taken and given to the new state of Poland is called the Polish Corridor. And this will come back up when we talk about World War II. That and a large portion of old Russian territory is going to be combined to create or to recreate the state of Poland. So you can look at the map and see what I'm talking about here. Now, with Austria-Hungary, you can also look at the map and see what the Versailles Treaty does to the empire. It breaks it up. And now we have in place of the empire, we have new, small, weak countries. And you can see Czechoslovakia and Austria and Hungary and Romania and other states. You can see them plainly here. Also, notice to the south of Austria-Hungary, or what used to be the empire, notice that Serbia got exactly what she wanted to begin with, a great Slavic state in southern Europe, Yugoslavia. So Serbia, having started this catastrophe, comes out smelling like a rose. And of course Yugoslavia will survive for much of the rest of the century, breaking up in civil war in the mid-1990s. You can look at the map here and see what happened to Russia. Portions of Western Russia are reconstituted. A part's going to go to Finland. The Baltic nations will emerge here, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Like I said, a large portion of Russia is going to be incorporated into the new state of Poland. So the map of Europe is redrawn. This is probably a good place to bring up Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points. These were published, I believe, in January of 18 when the war was still going on. Wilson's 14 points are kind of his vision of what the post-war world should look like, trying to correct some of those systemic problems that had brought on the Great War. implicit in Wilson's argument is the notion of self-determination, and this is a key term. When you look at the map of what Versailles did to Europe, all these new, small, weak countries, that's really Wilson's notion of self-determination in action. Wilson said these small peoples, these ethnic groups or these language groups should be able to self-determine their own future and have a sovereign nation, as opposed to being under the thumb of some great empire. So this is going to have dramatic consequences. I should say that Wilson's notion of self-determination kind of went around the world like a wildfire. You can imagine all these colonized peoples in Asia and Africa and elsewhere becoming terribly excited at the notion that the American president has put forward the idea that all people should be able to self-determine their future. And of course, this is not what Wilson meant. Wilson's self-determination is exclusive to Europe and will not be applied to the many colonized people around the world. This, of course, will cause great resentment and disappointment. What else can we say about Versailles? Not part of Versailles, but a separate treaty called the Sykes-Picot Agreement is now going to take the old Ottoman Empire, which is now dissolved, and is going to create new states in the Middle East. So what we think of today as Syria and Lebanon, the germ that will become Israel, Jordan, Iraq, on and on. These new states are created from the old provinces of the Ottoman Empire. Notice particularly the modern country of Iraq, created, I believe, in 1922 via the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And you can see that the British are awarded a mandate here over the sort of southern portion of the Middle East, while the French have a mandate over what we would think of as Syria and Lebanon. And you'll notice the British are occupying what today we would call Iraq. Of course, petroleum is discovered here, and the British want to be in a position to exploit the oil. And you'll notice that Iraq is formed from three very different, distinct provinces of the old Ottoman Empire. If you've ever wondered why today Iraq is such a mess and seems to be flying apart even as we speak, think about this. You can look at the map and see it. Basra, in the southern portion of Iraq, is dominated by the Shia. Baghdad, in the center portion of Iraq, is dominated by the Sunni. And then, of course, the northern portion of Iraq is dominated by the Kurds. So you have three distinct peoples here who don't get along. There are religious differences, political differences, tradition clashing, just myriad problems. And you can see that manifest after the U.S. invasion of Iraq and then our attempt to withdraw and then the country flying apart. Iraq seems to be holding together for the moment, but I wouldn't hold your breath on that. So you see the four great empires are dismantled, amputated, rearranged. We talked about the war guilt clause. We talked about self-determination. We need to mention Wilson's idea for the League of Nations. Wilson had the notion that through collective security, the world's nations could join this league or this club to put down a rogue nation or a nation that is acting aggressively. The rest of the world could gang up and stop this aggression, collective security. This is it sounds good in theory. It didn't work out well in practice. In fact, there are two large and important countries who do not join the League of Nations. The Soviet Union, they're not even invited to attend the Versailles deliberations. The Westerners want to keep the communists at arm's length. So the Soviets don't join, and of course the United States doesn't join, and that seems ridiculous. This is the American president's idea. Yet the Republican Senate will not confirm the treaty. They're afraid that this notion of collective security will require the United States to get involved in conflicts around the world in which we have no interest. So the treaty is not confirmed. In fact, Woodrow Wilson suffers a stroke as he campaigns across the country trying to drum up support so that the people will pressure their representatives in backing the president's idea, the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is going to lay the foundation for this interwar period, that period between the First and Second World Wars. A very treacherous ground it lays too. You'll see the seeds of the Second World War taking root here in this bad treaty. One of the French generals, I believe, I can't remember if it was Marshal Foch, but one of them said something to the effect, after examining the Versailles Treaty, he said, this is not a peace treaty, this is an armistice for 20 years. And he was exactly right. It was simply a ceasefire. The war will resume in 1939 when Hitler and the Nazi armies invade Poland and begin their takeover of Europe. So I'm going to stop there with Versailles, except I should say this. In 1918, in the fall of 1918, a German soldier, a corporal on the Western Front, in the trenches, he was assigned, I believe they call him a message runner. He'd run orders from one sector of the trench to another, a dangerous job. He's wounded in a gas attack that fall, and he's recovering in a hospital in Germany when the war ends, suddenly and surprisingly. And he can't believe it. He's incredulous that the Germans have lost this war. After all, there are still German armies in Russia. The front, the Western Front, is still in France and Belgium. The German armies are still there. There are no enemy armies in Germany. And this young man is just aghast that this could have happened. He begins to blame, he finds people to blame for this. Communists, Jews, Democrats, liberals. And he'll spend the entire decade of the 20s traveling up and down every road in Germany, demonstrating to the people of Germany that the Versailles Treaty has shackled Germany, put Germany to the back of the line as opposed to where she should be, at the front of the line. And of course, this young man is Adolf Hitler, and he will point to the Versailles Treaty as that document that has diminished Germany. And of course, his goal, once he comes to power, Hitler's goal will be to destroy the Versailles Treaty and to reverse the outcome of the First World War. Thank you for your attention.